They believed the battlefield belonged to men. They believed courage had a gender. They believed war was a place women watched from a distance and mourned from the shadows. But on a battlefield, choking with dust and screams, under a sky torn open by steel and death, one masked rider shattered every rule history had written. Roman ranks collapsed. War-hardened soldiers froze. Horses panicked. What is this sorcery? We strike him, but he does not bleed. We are fighting a ghost. And even the greatest commander of Islam stood still, watching. By Allah, who is that warrior? Moments later, the truth was revealed. This was no man. This was bint al-Azwar. And after her charge, history would never sound the same again. Before we continue, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Before the swords ever rang, before dust swallowed the horizon, before her name would make armies hesitate, there was a woman whose strength lived quietly. Khawla bint al-Azwar did not grow up expecting history to remember her. She was not raised for banners or battle cries. She was raised in a world where faith was taught before fame, where loyalty mattered more than recognition, and where courage often appeared in silence long before it erupted in action. She came from a household shaped by belief and discipline. Words of faith were not recited for show, they were lived. Responsibility was not discussed, it was carried. And from an early age, Khawla learned that dignity was something guarded fiercely, even when no one was watching. At the center of her world stood her brother, Khawla al-Azwar. Their bond was not casual. It was forged in shared hardship, mutual respect, and a loyalty so deep it felt instinctive. He trained as a warrior. She watched, learned, and absorbed, not with the intention of imitation, but with understanding. She saw what resolve looked like. She saw what sacrifice demanded, and she memorized it quietly. Khawla was known for her presence before she was known for her actions. Tall, composed and striking, but never careless with her strength. Those who encountered her sensed something firm beneath her calm, something unyielding beneath her grace. She did not raise her voice easily. She did not demand attention. Yet, she was not fragile, and she was never absent when duty called. Her faith was not loud, it was steady. Her loyalty was not poetic, it was absolute, and that was the danger. History often assumes that warriors are born restless, drawn early to chaos. Khawla was the opposite. She was grounded, rooted, fully aware of what she stood to lose, which is precisely why, when the moment came, her choice would carry such weight. She lived in a time when expectations were clearly drawn, lines were defined, roles were named, and she fit them until destiny demanded something else. What people failed to notice was the patience in her stillness, the discipline in her restraint, the way she listened more than she spoke, observed more than she revealed. Strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, and when it waits long enough, it becomes unstoppable. Khawla did not seek the battlefield. The battlefield came for what she loved. When word spread of war, of armies gathering, of blood and uncertainty, Khawla did not rush forward. She watched, she prayed, she waited. But inside her, something began to shift, not toward violence, but toward responsibility, because loyalty, when tested, becomes action, and faith, when cornered, becomes courage. Long before she would mount a horse, long before she would cover her face, long before her name would echo through the ranks of men, Khawla bint al-Azwar had already decided who she was. History simply hadn't caught up yet. The earth at Arjadain felt alive, restless, strained, as if it knew what was coming. Two armies stood facing one another, close enough to hear breath, far enough to feel the weight of hesitation. Steel caught the sun. Banners stirred without wind. Men shifted their footing, measuring courage against fear, waiting for a single mistake to shatter the balance. This was not yet chaos. This was the silence before it. Then it happened. From the Muslim ranks, a single rider moved forward, not with hesitation, not with command, but with intent. A lone figure, face concealed, armor dark against the dust, surged ahead of the lines as if pulled by something unseen. For a heartbeat, even the Muslims froze, uncertain whether this was signal or madness. And in that heartbeat, the rider accelerated. The horse thundered across the field. Roman soldiers shouted warnings too late. Shields came up unevenly. Spears tilted in confusion. No formation expects one. Armies are trained to face many, never a single force moving with such certainty. The first impact was violent, not loud, decisive. Steel met steel. A body fell, then another. The rider did not slow. She cut through the front ranks with a precision that looked practiced, almost surgical. She struck, withdrew, turned sharply and struck again. Horses recoiled, veterans hesitated, commands broke apart mid-sentence. What should have been an easy interception became something else entirely. Fear, not the screaming kind, but the kind that spreads quietly, infecting confidence. The Romans had faced seasoned warriors before. They had prepared for formations, charges, countercharges. They had not prepared for this. A warrior who did not retreat, a rider who did not pause, a presence that moved like it belonged everywhere at once. From the rear, Khalid ibn al-Walid Rayyan, who watched. He had seen battles turn. He had seen courage and collapse. He had watched men rise beyond themselves and others disappear in moments of weakness. But what unfolded before him did not fit any pattern he knew. The rider's movements were fearless but not reckless, aggressive but controlled. Each strike was purposeful, each withdrawal intentional. This was not rage, this was resolve. Roman lines began to fold inward, not from loss, but from uncertainty. Their front ranks bent, their rhythm broke. When discipline falters, defeat follows quickly. The masked rider plunged deeper, now surrounded, now isolated, now unstoppable. Khalid felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, not doubt but astonishment. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, tracking the rider's path through chaos. "By Allah," he murmured, barely audible over the clash of arms. "Who is that warrior?" No answer came. Only the sound of steel, the cry of the wounded, and the unmistakable shift of momentum. The Muslim ranks erupted with renewed force, emboldened by what they were witnessing. Confidence surged, feet moved forward, lines advanced, and still the rider fought on. Eventually, bloodied and breathless, she turned back toward the Muslim lines, cutting her way free as cleanly as she had entered. The moment she crossed back, the field seemed to exhale. Takir filled the air. Men gathered, voices layered with awe, praise spilling faster than understanding. Khalid rode forward, eyes fixed on the warrior who had just rewritten the opening of a battle. Whatever this was, whoever this was, history had just shifted, and it would never move the same way again. The battlefield did not quiet immediately after the charge. It lingered, breathing heavily, trembling with the echo of what had just occurred. Men stood staring where the dust still hung in the air, struggling to understand what they had witnessed. Courage, they knew, bravery they had seen. But this had unsettled something deeper, the kind of force that does not simply win ground, but fractures certainty. The rider had returned to the Muslim ranks, armor marked, blade darkened, blood traced the edge of her sword. Her horse stamped the earth, restless, as if ready to charge again. Voices rose around her, admiration tumbling into disbelief. By Allah, what strength! No man fights like this alone. Who is he? The question moved through the ranks faster than any command. It reached the commanders. It reached Khalid ibn al-Wahanu, whose eyes had not left the warrior since she emerged from the dust. He rode forward the way a leader approaches something unknown but undeniable. "Remove your veil, O warrior!" someone called out. Another voice joined, then another. Not suspicion, reverence, a need to understand. But the rider did not respond. She remained mounted, head lowered slightly, body angled away. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Why would someone who had just shifted the course of a battle refuse to be seen? What fear remained after such fearlessness? Khalid dismounted and stepped closer. "You have shaken the hearts of men today," he said, his voice steady, "mine included. Tell us who you are." For a moment it seemed she might ride away. Then she spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a restraint that cut deeper than shouting. "O Commander," she said, "I did not turn from you out of defiance, but out of modesty." Her words landed softly and changed everything. "I am a woman from among those who remain hidden, from the daughters of those whose honor is guarded." The air shifted. A silence fell that no sword could break. Eyes widened, breath caught. Some lowered their gaze instinctively. Others stared in disbelief, refusing to settle. Khalid stood frozen, not in shock alone, but in awe. He had led men who conquered empires. He had never stood before a woman who had done this. "A woman?" he asked, not doubting, but searching. She nodded. "My name is Khawla bint al-Azwar." Still no celebration, no prideful stance, no claim of glory, only explanation. "I learned that my brother Iran Azoir had been taken captive by the enemy," she said, "and I could not remain still." Her voice tightened, not with fear but with restraint. "I mounted my horse, I covered my face, and I did what was necessary, not for honor, not for history, not to be remembered. For love, for loyalty that refuses patience when blood is bound." Khalid looked at her, truly looked, and felt something heavier than admiration settle in his chest. This was not a warrior chasing renown. This was a sister answering a call no trumpet had sounded. "You have done what few men could," he said quietly, "and you have done it without asking to be seen." Around them the soldiers stood in humbled silence. Some felt pride, others shame. All felt changed. Khawla lowered her gaze once more. "Now," she said, "if you will permit me, let us reach my brother." Because for her, the battle had never ended. The news reached her quietly, but it did not enter her heart gently. Ibn al-Awari, who had been taken in chains, not fallen, not martyred, taken. The word itself burned. Chains did not only bind the body, they mocked the spirit. And for Khawla bint al-Azwar Radi Hanha, the thought of her brother dragged away under enemy guard tore open something deep and unguarded. She did not scream, she did not collapse, she went silent. Silence was how she grieved. Silence was how she gathered herself before movement. In that stillness, memories pressed in. Shared childhood moments, the unspoken promises of loyalty, the knowledge that blood does not ask permission before it demands action. That night, her tears came not loudly but steadily. Each one carried weight, each one sharpened resolve. Her grief did not weaken her, it clarified her. And in that clarity, words escaped her lips. Poetry shaped by pain, whispered to the desert wind, as if the land itself should bear witness. "How can sleep visit my eyes? When my brothers are wounded by captivity, I will weep as long as breath remains, for one dearer to me than my right eye." These were not words meant for ears, they were a vow. By morning, sorrow had transformed into direction. The Romans were moving fast, guarding their prize, believing distance would protect them. They underestimated what grief can do when it refuses to kneel. They underestimated a sister who does not accept delay. A small detachment was assembled. No banners, no announcements, only purpose. The desert swallowed them as they moved, riding by night, resting briefly by day. Stars became guides, footprints became warnings. Every grain of sand carried information. Khawla rode among them, not behind, not above, beside. Fatigue settled into muscles, thirst tightened throats. But resolve does not ask the body's permission. Each hour stretched, each mile closed the distance between despair and possibility. Then signs, tracks disturbed too recently, ashes still warm, the faint echo of movement ahead. They slowed, watched, waited. The ambush was swift, not chaotic. Timing precise. The Romans had grown comfortable, convinced they had escaped pursuit. That comfort cost them everything. The first strike shattered their formation. Panic replaced order. Commands collapsed under confusion. Steel met resistance, then silence. Khawla did not hesitate. She moved through the chaos with focus, not fury. Her eyes searched past the fallen, past the fleeing, until they found what mattered: chains. She found him blooded, restrained, still standing. For a moment, the battlefield disappeared. She cut the chains herself. No words passed between them at first. None were needed. The bond had survived distance, fear, and iron. Only after the last enemy fell did she allow herself to breathe fully. He looked at her not as a warrior, not as a rescuer, but as his sister. And in that look was everything. The return was quiet. No celebration, no display, just footsteps moving back towards safety, leaving behind proof that courage born of love does not fade after one charge. This had not been a moment of bravery. It was a pattern, and the world had only just begun to notice. Fate did not soften its hand for courage. Not long after victory, not long after rescue, the wheel turned again. In the chaos of movement and shifting fronts near Homs, Khawla bint al-Azwar Anha was separated from the fighters. Alongside other Muslim women, she was surrounded, overpowered, and taken. This time, there were no horses beneath her, no sword in her hand, no battlefield to choose her moment, only ropes, only guards, only the slow, deliberate humiliation meant to break spirits before bodies. They were marched together, women of faith, daughters of dignity, forced to walk with lowered heads. As Roman soldiers spoke with the confidence of ownership, the intent was clear: fear first, submission later. Some wept quietly. Some stared at the ground. Some trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of the unknown. Khawla watched it all in silence. Chains had bound her brother once. Now captivity tested something else entirely. This was a different war, one fought without steel, where defeat came the moment a woman believed she had become less than herself. That moment did not come. As the guards laughed and pushed, as whispers of despair passed between the captives, Khawla lifted her head. Her back straightened. Her voice, steady and unbroken, rose above the noise. "O women of Islam," she said, not shouting, but cutting through the air with certainty, "do you accept that your bodies be owned and your names erased? Do you accept that your children be born into chains? Is death not lighter than a life stripped of honor?" The guards turned, startled, not by volume but by authority. This was not the voice of a prisoner begging mercy. This was the voice of someone who refused the role assigned to her. Kay stepped forward, eyes moving from face to face among the women. "We were not created for this," she continued. "We are daughters of faith, daughters of people who do not kneel to humiliation. If weapons are taken from us, then we become the weapon." Something stirred. Fear did not vanish, but it shifted. It changed shape. It became anger. It became clarity. A woman spoke from the crowd, then another. Shoulders straightened, tears dried. The silence that once suffocated them now felt like gathering breath before a cry. "But how?" someone whispered. "We have nothing." Khawla's gaze moved to the tents nearby, to the ground, to what the guards believed was harmless. "We have enough," she replied, "and we have each other." She gestured to the tent poles, the stakes, the tools of confinement that could become instruments of defiance. "Better to fall standing," she said, "than live owned." That was the moment captivity cracked. The women did not rush blindly. They listened, they planned. They waited for the smallest opening, the moment arrogance loosened vigilance. When it came, Khawla moved first. She seized a pole and struck with precision, not fury. Surprise did the rest. The guards staggered, shocked by resistance they never imagined. Women surged forward, not screaming, but striking. Not chaotic, but united. What followed was brief, violent, unforgettable. When it ended, the ropes lay cut, the guards lay scattered, and the women once marched in silence stood free. They did not cheer. They did not boast. They gathered themselves and moved away from captivity, back toward dignity. Khawla walked among them, no longer merely a warrior of battle, but a reminder of something deeper, that even without weapons, even without strength of arms, a soul that refuses ownership can never truly be captured. The night did not expect them to rise. The guards believed the danger had passed. They believed fear had done its work. Women, unarmed and surrounded, were supposed to wait, supposed to endure, to submit, to disappear quietly into the margins of someone else's victory. They were wrong. There were no swords to draw, no shields to lift, no armor to hide behind. Only tent poles ripped from the earth. Only stakes clenched in trembling hands. Only hearts pounding with the kind of courage that is born when there is nothing left to lose. Bint al-Azwar Anha moved through the captives like a current before a storm breaks. Her eyes did not blaze with fury, they burned with focus. She counted breaths, she watched patterns, she waited for arrogance to loosen the grip of vigilance, for certainty to dull reaction. Then she stepped forward, not shouting, not hesitating. She lifted the pole onto her shoulder, feeling its weight, grounding herself in it. Around her the women followed, some afraid, some shaking, all resolute. They closed ranks instinctively, not trained, not drilled, but united by a shared refusal to vanish. When Khawla struck, it was precise. The first guard fell, not because he was weak, but because he never imagined resistance. Surprise shattered confidence. Confidence collapsing opened space. Space invited momentum. The women surged. Tent poles came down like thunder. Stakes struck hands reaching for weapons. The camp erupted, not with screams of panic from the captives, but with shouts of disbelief from those who had mistaken control for victory. This was not a battle planned by generals. This was not war shaped by formations. This was defiance made physical. Khawla moved at the front, not shielded, not spared. She deflected blows with one hand, struck with the other. Her movements were sharp, efficient, every action serving survival. Blood marked the ground. Dust swallowed cries. The air filled with the sound of impact and breath drawn too hard. Some women faltered. Khawla was there. "Do not break," she said, not loudly but firmly. "Stay together. Move as one." They did. Where one stumbled, another lifted her. Where fear crept in, resolve crushed it. They struck and withdrew, advanced and regrouped. Chaos worked in their favor. The guards had weapons but no answers, no preparation for this kind of resistance. History had not trained them for women who would not beg. The fight was short. It had to be. Endurance was not the goal. Escape was. When the opening came, Khawla recognized it instantly. "Now," she said. They moved together. Ropes were cut, tents collapsed, fires were overturned, and just as suddenly as the storm had risen, it vanished, leaving behind confusion, silence, and proof. When they reached safety, breathless and bloodied, the women stopped, not to celebrate, but to understand what they had done. Some stared at their hands, some wept, not from fear, but release. Khawla stood among them, steady as ever. No speech followed, none was needed. They had rewritten something ancient and unspoken. They had shattered an assumption older than steel, that women in chains are powerless. That night, the desert learned a new sound. Not the clash of swords, not the march of armies, but the echo of women who refused erasure and became the storm no one saw coming. Victory did not soften her edges. It would have been easy to step back, to let one charge, one rescue, one uprising become a story told by others. That is how legends usually end, a single moment frozen and repeated until it loses its pulse. Khawla bint al-Azwar Anha refused that ending. She returned to the road, Syria did not know peace in those days. Fronts shifted, cities changed hands, rumors traveled faster than armies. And within those rumors, her presence surfaced again. Not announced, not embellished, simply felt. A rider appearing where the fighting thickened, a voice steady where fear tried to settle, a will that moved forward when others hesitated. She did not seek command. She did not ask to be followed. She rode beside men who had already bled and would bleed again. And she matched their endurance without needing to prove it. When the clash came, she entered it without ceremony. No pause for courage, no pause for doubt. Courage had already been decided. Antioch tested resolve differently. The walls loomed, the resistance was stubborn. Long days drained strength, long nights drained patience. Here, bravery was not measured by a charge, but by persistence. Khawla endured it, as she had endured everything else, without complaint. When morale wavered, she did not lecture. She stood where the pressure was greatest and absorbed it, letting resolve speak louder than words. Men noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence recalibrated theirs. The question was no longer whether something could be done, but why it hadn't been done yet. Egypt came later, and with it, a different terrain, a different kind of exhaustion. Heat pressed in. Distance stretched supply lines. The enemy fought with attrition as much as steel. Here, Khawla's courage appeared quieter. Long rides, watchful nights, steady readiness. She did not need the chaos of battle to remain committed. Her faith did not spike in danger. It sustained in delay. Again and again, when retreat tempted comfort, she chose proximity to risk. Not because she chased hardship, but because she refused silence when presence was needed. That distinction mattered. She did not romanticize danger. She accepted responsibility, and that is what reframed everything. Khawla was not an anomaly. She was not an exception history allowed to slip through by accident. She was a reminder, clear and unsettling, that courage is not a costume worn by a certain kind of body. It is a response shaped by belief. Faith reshapes courage. It takes the raw material of fear and gives it direction. It strips bravado from bravery and leaves behind commitment. It allows restraint to coexist with ferocity, humility with strength. Khawla embodied that balance without announcing it. She did not argue for a place on the battlefield. She occupied it when conscience demanded and stepped back when it did not. Her measure was not comparison, but necessity. By the time her name traveled again, it no longer surprised. It steadied. Soldiers did not ask if she would appear. They assumed she might. And in that assumption was something profound. Her presence had normalized resolve. Beyond one battlefield, beyond one charge, beyond one uprising, Khawla's legacy settled into something more durable than legend. It became a lens. Through it, courage looked different. Faith looked active, and history quietly, unmistakably expanded. Time eventually quiets even the loudest battles. The dust settles, the roads empty, the horses are unbridled, and the names that once carried weight on the field begin to live only in memory. Khawla did not resist this final fading. She did not cling to renown. When the clashes receded and the borders stabilized, she returned to a life of worship, restraint, and quiet presence, unchanged by what she had done, untempted by what she had become. There were no grand announcements marking her final years, no attempt to preserve an image. She lived as she had fought, with discipline, humility, and a faith that did not depend on applause. Those who knew her then described steadiness rather than spectacle, resolve without urgency, strength without display. And when she passed during the caliphate of Umanafan Radian, there was no battlefield to record it, no sword raised, no dust stirred, just the end of a life that had refused to be reduced to a single moment. Yet endings do not erase echoes. Khawla did not leave behind monuments or titles. What remained was more difficult to dismiss. Her story unsettled because it did not fit comfortably into the categories history prefers. She was not an exception granted permission by extraordinary circumstances. She was proof that courage responds to conviction, not to expectations. Strength, her life suggests, is not volume. It is alignment. It is the ability to act without losing oneself, to step forward without demanding recognition, to withdraw without surrender. Kara's strength did not announce itself with declarations. It revealed itself in choices made when retreat would have been easier. Who decides who belongs on the battlefield of destiny? History often answers with habit, with precedent, with comfort. But Khala's presence asks a different question. What happens when faith redraws the lines? When responsibility overrides roles? When loyalty becomes action regardless of who is expected to carry it? She unsettles assumptions because she refuses simplification. She cannot be admired and dismissed in the same breath. She demands reconsideration, not only of who fights, but of why. Centuries later, her name still carries weight. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. Because it exposes the weakness of arguments built on limitation. Because it reminds us that destiny does not consult permission slips. Khawla bint al-Azwar. She was a mirror held up to it. In her reflection, the questions remain unanswered by design. What defines strength? Who draws the boundary of courage? And what might still be possible when faith, rather than fear, leads the way? Her life does not conclude with a command to imitate. It ends with an invitation to reconsider, and that perhaps is the most enduring legacy of all.